All right, we're live. What's going on, Mark?
Not much, man. It's been a while since we've done one of this, the two of us, but I'm excited.
Just the two of us. Yeah, I know. I miss these. These are often some of my favorite episodes. And I've been really excited for this one because, first of all, we have had incredible guests. We've done so many amazing conversations, and I'm excited to keep the podcast going. And also, at the same time, I think we've done a really good job of not getting into compromising quality territory for the podcast by doing like sponsorships, by taking on advertisers. We've kept it very like focused on quality and focused on fun. And so we've been really careful to not plug things. And so today, if someone's listening to this, I don't want this to come off like us like plugging something or being overly promotional, but there's something that I think you and I are genuinely excited to talk about. And I think it's relevant for our audience, which is insider loops. So it's something we've been promoting. And yeah, I just wanted to take an episode and go into why we did this, what we're hoping it accomplishes, why we're excited about it. And yeah, I think it'll be a fun conversation. Also compare some learnings from some of the first guides we've done. I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, and I completely agree with not coming across as promotional. I think we both care a lot about this. But I think my hope too is that this can almost inspire people in a way, right? I think it's becoming easier and easier to build with AI, with different tools. And my hope is that if we can break down why we identified this opportunity, why we decided to execute on it, and maybe share a bit of like how we went from this idea to launch and how we work together, because I think that's like another interesting part, right? Like we did a lot of this, like of course we had meetings, but a lot of the progress happened async, collaborating. So I think if we can share a bit of that, hopefully that inspires people to take that playbook and do something with it, which I think will be really exciting for me.
Hell yeah, let's jump in. First off, for those wondering, what is Insider Loops? So the basic idea is if you're getting ready for an interview at a company that is a popular company, but it's not quite yet at a scale where there's like ridiculous amounts of publicly available information on the interview process and what you need to know to get ready, you find yourself in a bit of a no man's land where there are a bunch of people who actually do know what you need to know to be successful in those interviews, but you might not know those people or how to get in touch with them. But their advice will very much be relevant to the interviews you go through, which is not like a Series A company that is hiring their second or third PM. There's actually no one that really knows what those interviews are going to be like because they change really fast. So there's this giant group of companies. In my head, it's probably like, at least 50 to 200 companies that are super popular and hiring a lot of PMs and are growing really fast, for which there is somewhat of a predictable interview process that is not yet well understood in public materials. And as a result, I get pings regularly from people that come to me for help getting ready for meta interviews. And they say like, hey, do you know about these interviews? And I'm like, I know a little bit about them, or I can put you in touch with someone that's worked there, but I don't actually have any structured materials to help you get ready for them. And when I was sharing that with you, Mark, apparently you get those pings from people regularly too. So we said, maybe there's an interesting opportunity to help people get ready for these very attractive interviews at companies. The first three companies we chose are Stripe, Uber, and Figma, but there's many other companies we want to expand to next. And to create a very easy to digest, yet very comprehensive, like inside look that combines the perspective of calibrated interviewers at those companies with what they look for, but also brings into the mix anecdotes and stories from people that recently went through those interviews themselves and provide the perspective of how they got ready and what worked really well for them into these things we call insider loop guides. So that's what the guides are. But yeah, Mark, I'd love to get your thoughts on what got you excited about this.
So I would say there's two things. I think the first one is I see this pattern all the time, right? Like I've gotten to know really a lot of product leaders at a pretty intimate level. A lot of them have become close friends from Supra. And a story that I've maybe seen too often, which it's really a bummer for me when I hear this, is like someone who I know are incredibly talented and they go through an interview loop and then they fail. And they're not failing because they're not good product people. They're failing because they were just not as prepared as they should have been. And they just did not have enough perspective on what to expect. And unfortunately, I think that's the reality of the hiring market. Like doing good at the job and being good at interviewing are very different skills, and it takes time to practice. But I think it's not just time to practice, it's knowing like what to practice. So I think that was one insight of like, I feel like there's like a big disconnect between like how talented someone was and how well they did in the interview. I think the interesting part, the only exception to that is for people that had connections to the other companies, either a previous manager was trying to poach them to join them, or they had a close friend that were in the company. Those people actually were in a very good position because one, they already came like highly recommended. And then two, they could ask more specific questions in a way that felt safer for them. So that's one insight, kind of like this disconnect of like how good you're at your job and how good you're interviewing, and seeing great people miss out on really good opportunities. And then the second one is similar to you, is for the people that kind of understood that, hey, like this is a game, interviewing is a game, and there's nuances to each company. I would get a lot of pings of being like, hey, can you introduce me to someone here or someone there? Or do you happen to know anything about this process? And don't get me wrong, I do love connecting people. And actually, that's probably one of the things that gives me more satisfaction. But I was like, I think there might be a more efficient way to do this. And I think also, it's not that I don't trust people to, like, I feel very confident that I can connect the right people and make sure that they have that conversation. But sometimes I don't really trust the people to ask the right questions or the questions that matter in a short period of time. So I think one thing that I think me and you are, especially you, we're uniquely positioned to do is we have talked a lot about interviews with people and the hiring process. So we really know where are the little pockets of information that is worth double clicking on, that there's going to be probably some interesting information on alpha that will give people an advantage. So yeah, those were the main two things that I was really excited about for this idea. And then generally speaking too, the third one is that we've been doing this podcast for almost 2 years. Really enjoyed working together. So I was like, hey, this seems like another great excuse to spend more time together and continue collaborating. So I was like, let's try it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the first 2 points are kind of like intellectually and rationally appealing. I think they're good business cases why there's something here, but it's also good value proposition cases to the world for why it's going to be impactful to do something here. But I think on a personal level, for me to get to invest the time, and we'll talk a bit about what the time investment actually looked like, but to justify the time investment for me these days, it does have to have this additional kind of emotional excitement, and I need to feel really excited about it. And I think so that third bullet point that you brought up is probably why this happened with the urgency and the speed in which it happened, is because it became like a fun, like exciting priority.
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't want to take that for granted. I think there's 2 elements here that were important, right? Like actually 3 things probably. One is like we enjoy working together and it's fun and it's enriching. I think the other one is that we actually have really good complementary skill sets. And I think the third one, which actually is the hardest one to align on, in my opinion, is from I think like values and principles, we're also very aligned, right? I think we're both like really care about our reputation. We really care about quality. And we also care about like, I think our approach to it is, hey, let's deliver as much value as possible. And I think in the long term, that would be a winning strategy. So I think that's like also another element that I think, yeah, just made it an obvious next step for us.
Totally. Yeah. And I think we've gotten good at this, the art of asking questions of people together and digging and following our curiosity, and then taking what we learn and putting it into a format that's presentable to people. That's what we've been doing a lot. We've gotten good at that with the podcast. And I think the question we had is, does that translate to any other mediums and other types of subject matters? And I think as we're starting to find out, I think the answer is yes. So yeah, where can we start? So I think
I almost wonder, I think it would be interesting for people to like maybe, so how we went about, okay, like there's something like we have this insight, right, that we both got independently from different places. And then how do we go into like deciding, hey, we're going to do these interview guides and we're choosing these companies? Yeah, maybe, what do you think?
Yeah.
I think that could be interesting.
So like anyone starting a startup, right, like a typical company or a startup, my view, and I think Marc evidently agrees, is it's smart to narrow in on a specific piece of the market to find what that wedge is for what you're doing. And then if you can succeed with the wedge and your hypotheses turn out to be true and there's the right unit economics at play, then you earn the right to expand and to grow your business. And as a result, you justify spending more time on it. So Marc and I are not doing this for philanthropy, right? Like we both need to have financially sustainable lives that allow us to keep creating value for the world and solving problems, given that neither of us has a boss right now in a like a steady paycheck. So we asked ourselves, where do we think we basically asked ourselves, what's at the combination of which companies are hiring a lot of PMs, which of those companies they're not big enough to have lots of publicly available information that's easily like for example, Meta, even though I teach a course and have a co-pilot, I would still put it in the bucket of a company that has like tremendous amounts of publicly available information about the interview process. Same with Google, for example, although that's changing, separate topic. And then I'd say the third one is, so we've talked about companies hiring a lot of PMs, don't have a lot of publicly available information about them. And then 3, companies that we might actually have some unfair access to. So like through our second, third degree connections, given our networks, like where are we confident we can get a critical mass of people that we know to like truly gain some unfair advantage relative to anything else is out there. And so that led us, we specifically looked at the websites of these companies and like, look, how many PMs are they hiring? And then based on that, obviously we also want to make sure there are like lucrative comp packages at these companies because we wanted to make sure the ROI story was clear for the guides when someone bought them. And that gave us a list of, I think we had 20, maybe 20, 30 companies in our original list. And then we decided to prioritize the first 3, which were Figma, Uber, and Stripe. Do you remember anything else about that part of the process that I missed?
No, I think those were the main ones. I think maybe another factor too that we were thinking about is, do we think this company is going to continue growing? Because like we don't want one of those companies that like it's just like in decadence, and then it's okay, like maybe it's going to be helpful now, but maybe in a year they might be struggling. So I think those were the main points there. And then I think once we agreed on, hey, I think these are like the 3 companies to start with, then our next kind of what I think I really like that we did is we were like, okay, like we've picked these 3 companies, Uber, Figma, and Stripe. Then I think what we did really was like we kind of set up like an arbitrary kind of deadline, I believe, like hey, like let's try to get like a guide done in 1 week or 2 weeks. So we scheduled a bunch of calls. I think we prioritized starting with the Uber one because we felt like, hey, like we know the most people there. We did that. And then I think basically what we were trying to like hypothesis there was like, hey, like, with our ability to ask really good questions and complement each other and trusting that we can cover a lot of ground and that that we had the right intuition on where to like double click versus not, can we use all that information and then package it in a way that creates a very compelling guide that's not accessible anywhere else? And that was really like the thing that we're worried about is, can we actually create something that's like high quality that we wouldn't be embarrassed to sell? So I believe for Uber, we probably did four interviews or something like that. And then, we've kind of, the cool part too that I want to mention is that while we're planning all of this, the way we're collaborating is not like a Google Doc or something like that. We actually have a GitHub repository where we also started to, in parallel, vibe code a website. But also that's where we had all our notes. We would keep track of our goals, and we would have all our different like interview transcripts, and we basically use a combination of the cursor agents and Cloud Code to produce a lot of the stuff that we were creating and generating. And so that was also like...
What's cool about that setup too is as we basically took the transcripts of our planning meetings, where it's just you and I talking about what this is and what it's for, and put those transcripts into the repo in Cursor, then when it came time to vibe code the website, I could basically refer to those files as like the source information that gave us the foundation to create the vibe coded website, which made it much faster. And I didn't have to like give as much context just for that part.
Yeah. And I think it was just fun too. Like I vividly remember like looking forward to working on this because I was like, oh, I'm getting to try this new piece of technology. I was getting started with Cloud Code. I was also using Codex. I was using the cursor agent. I was like, I'm really have an excuse to really test the limits of these tools. And also like do things like, hey, collaborating in Git with someone else. I had used Git before, but it was mainly for kind of individual projects.
This definitely was the thing that pushed me into Cursor, which I've now been using for we'll do a separate episode about my Copilot setup and stuff. But like sometimes all you need is like a push to go learn a new tool, and then you just get it. And so this gave, I think, both of us a good excuse to get deep into Cursor. And we've been using it multiple days a week, sometimes every day. And that's been really valuable.
Yeah. And I think the cool part too, as you said, like we both found other use cases in our lives that I think have been extremely additive and probably saved us like hours and hours of work. But yeah, then I think we created that kind of Uber guide. It was just like a markdown file because LLMs love that and .md file. And I think we both were, I'm not going to say that we just nailed it on the first shot. There was a good amount of back and forth and testing different prompts, but eventually with that and a bunch of edits, we were able to, and that's the other cool thing too, that I think, because initially we would work together on the show notes. Like we've got a really good like editing kind of collaboration as well. So I think with the edits, with the prompting, we were able to get one that we both felt like, okay, I think this is pretty good, but we want to get validation. So I think something else that we did is then we went back to people that either interviewed recently at Uber and be like, hey, is this helpful? Is this something that you would have really better prepared you when you did? And The answer was yes. And then the next step was more around, okay, cool. Like I think we have information that's hard to access anywhere else, that's valuable, that
There's one step that you're
yeah.
missing, which was you had a light bulb moment because we both had this paranoia that we were like missing something big. Is there something we just didn't ask the right question about? Are there any gaps in our knowledge? Because we definitely don't want to put something out there that is missing something that's publicly known already. And then we look like really bad and it doesn't meet our quality bar. So you had the light bulb moment of, hey, let's do a deep research report about each of these companies' interview processes and then enrich basically any gaps that we missed. We just figure out whether we want to incorporate or whether that's in conflict with something that we found and I'm not going to get into the details of how we did all that, but that was an incredibly valuable moment because I think that gave us the confidence to say with a straight face, there's nothing that's like publicly known about these interview processes that we are missing. Our guides are like, they have a baseline of what's publicly known plus a bunch of stuff that is not publicly known that you can only find out by literally having a call with someone who's like an insider at these companies.
Totally. So I think that's a great point. Like that deep research and query gave us that confidence that, hey, like we actually not only have the baseline, but we have more than it. I think another thing that gave me confidence from the deep research is that part of the prompt was like, hey, like make a list of all the things where these guides disagree. And I think there was like maybe 20 bullets of things where people disagreed, and there were like different time-based like time tags of like, or timestamps of like, when was that? So I think that also actually, what we learned from that moment was like, we should actually do this before we start interviewing. So then we can use those areas of conflict as a way to help us guide, be like, hey, like I think there's disagreement here. That probably means that there's an opportunity for us to bring clarity and to reconcile it.
Conflict and gaps. Because what we found out is like when we finished the first guide with Uber, we were like, man, like this is so, like we looked at it top to bottom, we're like, every guide should have the bones of this guide. This guide really gets into the structure that we want to be the repeatable structure. So if we can then run a deep research report on, I don't know, the third guide or the fourth guide, let's say Stripe, for example, and it knows, we can basically have a prompt that knows where we want to end up and it knows what it gets from the deep research report. It not only can identify conflicting information between transcripts and the deep research report, but it can also just help us identify gaps that the deep research report didn't identify. These areas, these are open gaps. And then we can do transcripts, and based on those transcripts, here are like the remaining gaps. So if each additional call we do is going to get more and more focused on the specific gaps in the guide, which is a much more disciplined and focused way of going about what to cover in each interview versus doing 5 of the same interview just to realize we missed something at the end that no one talked about.
Yeah. And the cool thing is like now we run that prompt every time we have an interview. So every interview is getting more and more focused and is building on top of an already strong foundation.
And so, then, I think then that gave us a Google Doc basically. And I think we had this realization that, man, like if you bought this and all you received was this like really long Google Doc with just a bunch of words.
I think it was like 16 pages basically.
Very comprehensive, but at the same time, like I've had the fortune to collaborate with Lenny on a couple guest posts on his newsletter, and people will know there's a reason there's visuals in those posts, is because it helps the post be more digestible. And if it was just like a giant block of text, like people wouldn't enjoy that newsletter as much. I think we had our own realization getting there from almost like first principles. Like this is a lot to digest. I'm just like QAing this right now, and this is a lot. So then we, I think, had a series of discussions, probably 1 or 2 discussions. We both slept on it for probably at least a few days each. And we had this realization, like we need a better way to present this. So, and I think right around that time, I kept seeing Gamma popping up on my feed because friend of the podcast and friend of Supra, Diana, who we had, I forget how many episodes ago, but she joined, I think, Gamma as, I think, a head of product, or she's product lead. And I was like, let me see what this Gamma thing is all about. Because apparently you just give it stuff and it makes beautiful presentations. And we have a bunch of real interesting content that needs to be visualized better. So I think that was a moment where I had an aha moment. And I was like, let me go play with this. And I took the markdown file and fed it into Gamma and started tinkering. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the way. Like we can take this very text heavy guide that we created, do some basic prompting, and use out of the box what's magical software. If someone's listening, we won't make any money by you going and using Gamma, but it's an incredible product and you should try it out. They have a really good free plan, and hit a usage limitation while seeing really good quality. So we upgraded to like one of the paid plans. and then started generating what I thought were really insightful guides, and came up with the idea of we should have at least 2 gammas that we produce for each of these guides. One is more of like a slide presentation that allows you to get like super high level, but like very accurate content for digesting the whole guide. And then you can almost like double click by consuming the second gamma, which is more of a detailed and visual rich guide. It reads more like a Lenny post, like a document with like visuals along the way to understand all the content and internalize it. And then to top it all off, because I know people with my course and the stuff that I teach often want to consume it when they're at the gym or they're driving, like a podcast. We said, hey, like, why don't we also take the markdown file and generate a couple Notebook LM artifacts, one being like a podcast and one being a video overview based on the same exact content. So what people get is basically 4 artifacts that allow them to digest the same exact content in different ways, which is suited to my style of learning. And I think a lot of other people's, which is sometimes you need the same, you need a few layers of paint to get the full kind of like effect.
Yeah. And that felt really good, just because I felt like we were delivering a lot of value in different mediums, which would adapt to whatever kind of time you have. And also, again, you can read it, you can maybe listen while you're consuming it. So yeah, we felt really good about that. Ben did all the gamma stuff, and I was honestly like mind blown, because it was really like the content was really good. It condensed it to the essentials. And what is amazing too, I'm not sure how much work that took, but a lot of the guys also felt like they were following the same like brand and feel of the company. Like the Uber one was like black, it was like very like direct to the point, which I thought was really cool too.
Yeah, the templates, I've talked to Dan and the Gamma team. I think the templates have some work to do, because like the Figma one doesn't look exactly Figma-y, like the same way that the Uber one looks Uber-y. The content's obviously just as good as it would be if it did look like Figma-y. But yeah, I think the Uber one was particularly, we had this like holy shit moment, because the black and white, they had a perfect black and white template that just felt, yeah, deluxe. And that was really dope. And then we had to basically figure out how to take these, call it 4 artifacts, and package them in a way that someone could come to the website that we vibe coded. If people want to check this out, by the way, insiderloops.com. And they could go and they could check out each of the guide. And we had we decided to make a preview. So we wanted to let people preview each guide. So they basically see an abridged version of the slides for each of the gammas. And then we also said, okay, like if we make sales, what do people get? When do they get it? How do we like deliver this good? And I think a lot of the learnings for me from what I've been doing with my co-pilot, I think paid dividends on this front. And we ended up hacking together like a workflow that is manual today, like that involves Gmail primarily. So we deliver the guides over Gmail. We give people, we add their emails to like the files that they get access to. And then we deliver this digital good. And then we have some other automation set up for basically converting people's interest in the previews into emails, because we want to deliver the guides to people that should get them. We want to also keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of future guides coming out. And so when someone wants to preview the Stripe guide, maybe they'll be interested in a future guide as well. So we're starting to build out an email list as well that allows us to just give people free content as we have it.
Another thing that I think that was really smart that you did, Ben, in that kind of like email collection form, is using it as a way for people to tell us what guides to do next. So we're definitely going to use that. And we still have our like maybe like 20 companies list that are hiring a lot of PMs, but I think we're also going to trust the people that are submitting to let us know, hey, here's what I'm interested in, and then use that as a way to prioritize. And then the cool thing is that we already know then, based on their preferences, like who is interested in that future guide, so we can deliver them when the time comes, which is really cool.
Yeah, one thing I find interesting about that that form, by the way, where people tell us which previews they want to get, is they're not very like imaginative, or at least they don't seem to trust us yet that we'll get to the companies that they want us to do, because the responses we've gotten are basically all options that we're already thinking about or options that we already have live. And one of the things I'm excited about is as we start to deliver these guides and start to create a lot of value for people, that we do start to maybe get more of those, more of a pull from the market for exactly where they want us to go next, because they trust that we'll deliver. And I think as we get good at this, we'll be able to deliver faster and faster, because our process will get more buttoned up, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. And I think our goal with this too, I think is like, we both get so much energy from delivering impact. Like, I think there's nothing that is more satisfying on our workday when we get an email or a Slack from someone, be like, hey, just wanted to let you know that I just got this job, and it was because you connected me to this person or because you gave me these tips that were super helpful. So I think that, to me, that's what winning looks like here.
Oh yeah, I want more of
And
that.
yeah, and just to be totally frank, like, these guides are extremely helpful, and I think they're going to save people a ton of time. Like, assuming that some of the people can do like what we did, and then there's some people that I think it'd be really hard for them. So we're not only just saving time, but giving them access to something that they wouldn't be able to get. But I think that's only just like one kind of like leg of this tool, right? Like, I think knowing what to expect is just one piece. I think to nail the interview, you also have to practice. You also need to get feedback from the right people. So I think I think something that I get energized is to continue to build on that and see if we can find ways to give people access to different legs of this tool too. So they're like coming to those interviews as prepared as they could be. And then they can come in and be confident that, hey, I already did everything that I could on my control. The rest is up to whatever happens, which we should talk to at some point of like, kind of like, unfortunately, still all of these companies, the way they interview is not super calibrated. There's a lot of variance, but at least I think we can give people the confidence that, hey, you've done everything in your control. I think that would feel extremely meaningful to me.
Yeah. Actually, one person that bought it, because we have made some sales already, and one person who bought the Uber guide said it's super helpful, and it gave this person, I'm not going to divulge anything about them, but it gave them like a framework and a level of kind of like confidence of what they need to know to get ready for the Uber interview. And it reaffirmed the importance of the jam, for example, which is like the centerpiece of Uber's. It's like where the biggest drop off happens in their process. It's the hardest part to get through. And if you get through the jam, I'm not saying it's guaranteed you'll succeed, but like, I'd say you're over a big hump in the road if you can get through the jam. And what we found through putting together the guide is every jam is almost entirely unique. It's almost like designed for the specific role that is being filled. And so when this person was digesting the guide and said it was super helpful, they said, look, like, this is obviously not something you could put in the guide itself, but do you guys offer the ability to do like a simulated jam as like a service, right? And I'm like, that's an incredible good idea that I don't think I've seen anyone doing that, because the format of a jam requires multiple people to interview you and grill you about a specific role. So that's the kind of area where, like, if we can, and every company is going to have its own version of what the jam is at their specific company. Like Figma, I think it's the presentation, right?
Yeah.
And we can talk. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what stuck out to you from the specific guides, if there's anything you want to share. But like, that's an example of something that stuck out to me for an expansion area that would be extremely additive to candidates and help them prepare with more confidence. Because based on what we learned, so many people go into things like the jam and they're like deer in the headlights. They don't know how to respond. It's almost like no one gave them the expectation of what it's supposed to feel like when you're in the jam. It's not supposed to feel calm. It's supposed to feel crazy. Like, you know, so like knowing what to expect there, I think, is really important.
Totally. I think just knowing that piece of information can be such a game changer, right? I think, let's say you go blind into the jam, and then all of a sudden you are 2 minutes into your presentation and people are just throwing curveballs that will basically derail the rest of the presentation, right? If you're prepared for that, I think that's going to feel like, okay, cool. I saw it coming and I've practiced. I have maybe like my tactics of maybe asking the question back, or maybe reframing it, or maybe like deciding, hey, is this push worth entertaining, or should I be actually like, that's a good question, but I think for XYZ reasons, I should continue with what I'm doing. And just knowing that, I think, gives you that confidence that if you didn't, you'd be like, oh shit, I'm fucking up. I'm like, really, they're already asking questions on the first 2 minutes. Like, maybe that means that I'm completely in the wrong direction. So totally agree.
Knowing that the expectation is that you're going to take each of the questions, you're going to do a very quick triage of, is this an asteroid or is this like a little pebble, right? Should this completely change the trajectory, or is this something that I just need to like casually incorporate, make them feel heard, like they're an executive in a high stakes product meeting, be like, great point, I would consider it this way, here's how it fits with what I'm saying, and then like very elegantly bring the conversation back on track so that you can continue and get through the rest of the exercise. Knowing, one of the people we interviewed told us, you know, the interviewer can really torch you. Like, one of the people in the room can torch you within like a second in the jam. So like, the interviewers have to be mindful of not asking questions that will completely torpedo the interview, because they're doing a favor to the hiring manager, is one thing we've learned. Like, hiring manager handpicks the people to be in the jam, And so if they torpedo a candidate that the hiring manager is really excited about, that's eating into like their social capital with the hiring manager. So there's like all these like interplays behind the scenes that play into it.
And I definitely want to make sure we save some time to continue like with these nuggets just for the sake of delivering value. Like I think it just would be fun to like maybe share some of the things that were most surprising without chilling too much, but just like some quick learning. So let's put a pin there. But I wonder if we should cover anything else before we jump into that, like kind of those things that were surprising to us. I wonder, this one might be a little bit maybe uncomfortable to do live, but I think for the sake of transparency, we should maybe talk about it. I think a big question is like pricing, right? Like how do we decide to price it and the way we did and what we thought about? And I think it just might be helpful for people to think like how we came up with that number.
I think our original, so we had a couple data points that I think gave us some like
benchmarks
that helped shape, benchmarks, right? So we saw, I think, Product Alliance is in the market at $850 for some of their guides. We know mock interviews go anywhere from on the bottom end of mock interviews to like probably $150 or $100 at igotanoffer.com, which is like on the low end, all the way to like $600 or so, which is I think like $700 a session, which is what I see at the premium top end of the market for like meta style mocks. We have my course, which is most recently was at $1,500. Now it's at $1,800. We have my Copilot, that's at $500. So we had like all these different price points that we were aware of what people are paying. And then I think we asked ourselves, what would feel expensive but still worth it? And so originally I think we were thinking about $750, I think is where we started. And then as we got to playing with the guides and like looking at them and digesting them, I think we both had this moment that's like, I think we would feel better about delighting someone who buys this with the value by going with a lower price point. And I think we briefly thought about $500 and landed on $300. And I think the way that in my head I rationalized $300 is I want someone to feel like, I remember when I was at Attentive and I interviewed like tons and tons of marketing teams and asked them how they justify spending money on ads. Everyone has like a return on ad spend number in their head. So it's like for every dollar I put in ads, if I get $2 back or $3 back, I'm really happy. And I thought about that for what we did, which is, let's say someone spends $300. How much value would they need to get out of it to feel like it was like at least 4 or 5 times as valuable, like in return? And I think I truly believe that for someone to recreate these guides on their own, like the exact content, they'd have to talk to at least, I think, 2 people at each of these companies and ask them the exact right questions. And they'd have to take the time to probably do the deep research report to make sure they don't miss anything and to synthesize everything into like a very easily digestible guide. And I think that's at least 3 to 4 hours of work. And if they value themselves at $500 an hour, as I think any senior product person, that should be like a average / floor, then that's $2,000 of work that they wouldn't have to do, $2,000 of time that they wouldn't have to put into this, assuming they had the access to the people. If they don't have the access to the people, then it's literally a product they cannot get on their own.
It's like access to the people. Then once you have access to the people, good luck getting more than like 25 minutes, right? So I think that's something that we both have built some good karma. And also I think we're in a position of like, we can be helpful to people. So I think people want to be helpful back to us. So yeah, I think 4 hours is very generous for someone because I think you also have to do the outreach to people, right? You're not just going to message 2 people and they're going to like reply right away. Yeah. I think that to me was like, I think we both were like, yes, like this is at $300. We feel both very comfortable like putting our names behind it and it's at least 5x return. So I think that's all to say, like, well, I wouldn't be surprised if the prices go up over time. But I think for now, it just felt like a good starting point.
The other thing we, I think, agreed on is, especially given how dynamic the interview process is these days, we both agree that there's going to be evolutions to the ways that each of these companies run their interviews. And so we wanted to, and this is very much still part of our plan, is that if you buy like an Uber guide, you will get lifetime access to future updates. Lifetime feels easy to say right now, but I think that's fair. If I buy an Uber guide and I'm going to interview in 6 months and there's a big change to the process 3 months from now, I think it would feel weird if if I didn't get an updated version of the guide that kind of reflected the latest. And the way that we're structured right now is it's going to be work for us to update the guides. I don't think we've been through a major update yet, given how new it is. But I think that would make me feel better as a buyer of the guide to know that I get those lifetime updates. So that's what we decided to do.
Yeah. I also think it gives confidence to people that are buying. Okay, like I'm not buying. There's some options out there that haven't been updated since late 2023. And I think for us, I think we haven't decided the cadence yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did at least like a quick check once a quarter to make sure.
And I will say that like our stack and the decisions we've made in our workflow and this process of putting together the guides and the tools are what will allow us to, I think, move very fast and to stay very close to the market relative to, like, for example, if we decide to put together a Kajabi course that was all video content that we recorded like manually with modules and lessons and stuff, and then there's a big update to the process, we'd have to basically re-record a whole course, right?
Yeah. Unless we did like something like Synthesia or 11 Labs or maybe like we can take it to the next level. But yeah, I think that's maybe
one
like
day we try that.
A B3. So yeah, I think anything else that we should cover on
the last thing I'll say is I think we originally, now we're getting into like should we talk about it or not, but I think it's so interesting. One thing that I think just made me feel better about humanity that I learned so far from this is like we had this assumption that we would have to pay people to talk to us and to give us the insights about the companies. And when we had the conversations, we learned that the people who are employed either like they used to be at Uber, for example, or are actively at Uber, who would talk to us, felt gratitude, I think, for being in the position that they're in this current market and having a coveted, like a high paying, lucrative job at a coveted company, and felt like they were giving back. They were helping people by talking to us. And there wasn't like a profit incentive at all in the minds of the people that we interviewed for these. And I thought that was beautiful, but also it actually allowed us to offer these guides at a lower price point because we didn't have to like pay people to talk to us.
Yeah. Like our biggest expense was our time, which is not cheap, but yeah, it's things that there's no like direct monetary thing that you have to take away. And yeah, I think that was really cool. And I think the other thing that was just reflecting is that I think initially I was worried that people were going to be more guarded and they were not going to share as much. And I was actually surprised by how much people shared.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Marc and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
And I think my reflection here is similar to yours. I think people just want to help out, but I think the people that we talk to, like for some reason, they got the feeling that we're high integrity folks, right? And that we're going to do the right thing and that we're not going to get that in trouble. And that to me, I was really touched by that, right? And I think it's just like, I think there's been a lot of decisions in the last 3 years, especially running a business, where I've been faced with two options, and I've usually taken the one that's like, we're just going to be long-term for my reputation and for the business reputation. And I've tried as much as possible to take that path. And I think this moment reminded me of like why that's important. So
100%.
That was really cool and touch.
I think you're right, because I still think in a lot of ways going into conversations, and I'm not saying like we're celebrities, but like in our world, in our little niche of a world in product management on LinkedIn or whatever, we are starting to get a little bit of name recognition and the good kind, like high credibility, high integrity kind of people. So going in these conversations, sometimes I still think like I'm some random early 20s, like mid 20s, nobody who's talking to people. And then you're right, like the fact that they talk to us does feel validating to a lot of the ways I've been choosing to show up online and publicly, and I guess it fosters faster trust.
Yeah, which has been really cool. Okay, should we maybe one last thing, and then we'll jump into like maybe some cool learnings. I'm curious to see what you thought was interesting, and I'll share what I thought was interesting from the way these companies do interviews. But the last thing too that we decided to do is when we prioritize a guide that's going to come out, that it's not finished, we also thought about, hey, like we're going to create like an early access plan where it's going to be reduced. Instead of being 300, it's going to be 200. And it's just like an opportunity for people to getting some return for trusting us early. What's really interesting is that so far no one has, like we've had some sales, but no one has been from early access. I wonder if that's going to change over time, but that'll be an interesting thing to continue to pay attention and see what happens.
And I think the hypothesis for that in my head, because Stripe is the one that we're talking about, it's been the early access one because we shipped the Figma and the Uber ones at once, and then we had the Stripe one coming next. And I suspect that the buyer psychology here, especially looking at the preview form submissions being with Stripe being arguably the most popular one that people want the preview guide for, is that there's just like a skepticism of, hey, like this is time sensitive. I'm getting ready for my interviews. Why would I pay you now if I don't know when I'm getting that? And I think as we get better and better at predicting dates and like ready dates on things, we can start to say coming September 2025 or coming October 2025 or something like that. And maybe that'll actually give people the confidence to buy it because they'll know like it'll fit within their timeline. Okay. So yeah, I'm curious to get your thoughts as you think about surprise, like you want to go like almost like surprising things about the specific companies or more anything else surprising about the overall kind of like process?
I think let's start with companies and then we can end up with the process overall.
Cool. You want to start with Uber because that was the one we started to get into?
Yeah. And so I think the biggest surprise for me at Uber was that like how non-standardized and how like almost out of the three companies that we've done, even though it's by far the biggest one by like orders of magnitude, it felt the most, I don't want to say disorganized, but I want to be the one, it's the one where I felt like there's more entropy in the process and two people can get a completely different experience, even though they're interviewing at a really large company. And if I reflect why that's the case, and the reason why I'm sharing that is because if you think about it, it's like cool story, but that's not very applicable, right? Like you're just telling me that depending on who I get, I might have a great experience or not. But I think that's why I'm sharing it, right? Like I think just I want people to be kind to themselves and notice that, hey, like that's going to be, that could happen, right? Like that what your friend went through is going to be different than what you go through. And the root cause for that, what we learned is that, which also was wild, like the hiring manager actually does all the recruiting for the different stages of the interview, right? For example, the jam, they decide which PMs attend to that jam. For the on-site where they have designers, engineers, etc., they also recruit it, right? Like they're using they're using their time to ask people to join, and they're also using their social capital. Like, hey, like, can you take like an hour out of your busy week to help me hire? So I thought that was,
and then they give them the questions, or they tell them which areas they want to get signal on. So as an interviewer, it's so much improv. Each thing is unique. It's not cookie cutter on the interviewer side.
Yeah. So I think that was like really, just surprising too, because I think, again, it's also something that's interesting is there's not really like a formal calibration process for the interviewers. Basically, like the calibration that happens most of the time is, I think there's like an interview training that sounded very, very vanilla than anyone that interviews like Uber has to do. But then probably the most useful calibration is like basically the hiring manager be like telling people, hey, here are the questions that I want you to ask, or here's like a question bank. And here's a signal that I want to look for. What is consistent though, and it's helpful, is that it sounds like in Uber, like the way they measure PMs and the way that the rubric is very much based on their kind of like PM core competencies, which we include in the guide. So I think at least that those are like top of mind and people could know what great looks like because it also maps to their career guide and things like that. But so in that sense, that is the one thing that's standardized. But the way you ask the questions, the way you probe, all that stuff, it's pretty much like you have to trust that person that you're asking to interview to be good at it.
And in addition to the PM competencies, what I thought was really cool about Uber is that they also are expected to use the company values and like to evaluate the people. Like, for example, one of their values is trip obsessed, right? So people that showcase that value, I think will, and we go into all the values in the guide, but like, I think those play into the behavioral interviews. Like, what are people looking for? It's like value alignment and people that are really like perfect for Uber.
And I thought the other thing that was interesting too is in big companies sometimes like for example Meta, and correct me if I'm wrong since you're like the in-house Meta expert, is like the pool of candidates are across the entire company and the product org, right? Like you can talk to someone who's like doing something that's like very unrelated to the work you're going to be doing. At Uber, that's completely different. All the people that you're going to interact with the interview are either going to be in your team or are like very closely connected to your work. And the reason why I'm saying that is I think understanding what's unique about the dynamics of that team. And at the end of the day, like Uber is a marketplace, right? So like what's unique about the supply side, the demand side, and like that's, or like maybe like more like the platform, like that's going to give you an edge. So I think that's like another thing that was like interesting of like which I actually think is a good thing, right? Because I think you can actually get more signal and prepare better for your interview and use that to your advantage.
Totally. I'm trying to think of anything else that kind of stuck out before we go on to Figma. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was common, I think for both, I think it was maybe more at Uber potentially, is the importance of like, and I know this is gonna be true for Stripe too, because we're wrapping up that guide, but the importance of having the recruiter in your corner that helps you get ready for calls, and kind of, it's almost like really internalizing that the recruiter is your guide. We're creating this guide that you can consume, but like it's only going to get you to some point, like to the point where you're ready to show up for the interviews. But as far as like your Sherpa almost, or your guide throughout the interview process themselves, like the people we spoke with that excelled in the interviews were the ones that truly embraced like the recruiter as like a competitive advantage.
Totally. I just want to double emphasize that because I think it's probably the most consistent, helpful point across all the interviews is that, and I think the reason why it's important is you can get really lucky and have a recruiter that's going to spill all the beans, give you as much as detail as possible from the beginning, but you might get maybe a more guarded recruiter. And if that's the case, it's up to you to get the information, but you should definitely do that. And you should make sure they like you. And you should make sure that you're in close communication. You, in a really cool way, your goals are aligned, right? So if you can make that recruiter feel like betting in you as a winning horse is going to be worth it, they're going to want to make you win. And they have all the information you need to succeed. So I think that's one thing that and even in Stripe, I would say is even more important, because Stripe, basically what happens is after the onsite, the hiring manager talks to everyone who was part of an interview of the onsite, and then the hiring manager and the recruiter put together a packet. Almost, you can think of it as almost like the performance packet that you get at big companies where you're calibrating, and then they throw that at a kind of committee of product leaders in Stripe. And of course, like it's pretty standardized as a rubric and things like that. But if you spend a little bit more energy or put a little more care, like it's going to make it different. And the people that are doing that are the recruiter and the hiring manager. So I think maybe the thing that I'll say too is that if you can also do the same with the hiring manager and keep them in the loop during the interview process and have self-awareness, be like, hey, I messed up this part of the interview, here's why, or just like keeping them in the loop. I think that's going to help build trust. And again, it's going to make them want to go to bat for you.
Yeah, that felt so true about Uber. Like Uber out of the three felt to me like the one where it was like the difference between success and failure of having the hiring manager really your champion, I think is important in all three. But like, I think in Uber, it felt like it was the strongest.
For sure. And I think the last thing I want to say about Uber is two things. We talked about the jam already. And I think we talked about, hey, coming prepared to be interrupted. That's actually like the name of the game, right? But there's two things that I want to make sure that people know too. One is build your deck in a way of like that if you're interrupted, you can still get useful information. So almost
have an appendix. Yeah,
exactly. Have a model or like almost try to predict like where they could interrupt and which might be some like fair pushbacks, and have a kind of build your own adventure type of deck where you can jump from one place to another. That's one. The other one too, that's not uncommon for big companies where they have a lot of open roles, is that maybe you're not the best fit for that team, right? Maybe they're looking, let's say you're like interviewing at a security team at Uber and you don't have like a lot of security background. You might not be the best team, but if they're really impressed with the artifact that you put together in that jam, they will, like hiring managers will share, be like, hey, this is really good work. And if another hiring manager sees that and they like it, they might pull you back into that loop and basically allow you to move directly to the onsite. So almost think as an investment for you, and almost expect that artifact will be shared externally. And if it's well done, it can really be helpful. And then the last piece there on the artifact, a common theme is that all these companies will give you like a 4 or 5 hour estimate. I don't know, it's an arbitrary number, but it's like usually under 5 to 6 hours. Don't trust that. Everyone that we talked to, both on the hiring manager and someone who went to the event, like spent, over 20 hours. So I think just if you're on the fence of like, ooh, should I be like, follow the rules? Don't, because I think no one does, and you're going to be in a disadvantage.
Yeah, one person we spoke with from Stripe said they explicitly got a piece of advice from someone to not overinvest in their homework assignment, and this person chose to completely ignore that and end up doing really well in the interviews. He's like, yeah, don't listen to that. That's bad advice. You want to overdo it. The other thing I'll say, and I think this probably applies to both Figma and Uber at this point, maybe Stripe to some degree, but definitely those two, is because the way that they hire, and we'll get into Figma in a minute, the way they hire is so role specific and need specific and team specific. Your choice of like basically which role to go after is actually a quite important choice. Whereas Meta, because they, like you said, like they interview you for the whole company and you do team matching after you get offer approved. That's not the way that it works in these interviews. They're basically evaluating you for, are you the perfect person for this exact business need and this exact team, this exact function at every single step of the interview. So if you don't think you're the perfect person for one of these jobs, and you think that if you wait a month or 2 months even to find that perfect opening, then you're probably better off waiting to really go for it, for the perfect job that you're the fit for, versus trying to convince them why you're the perfect fit for a job that they might have to like squint to see it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's just like a trend in general that I'm seeing in the market, and I'm curious if you're seeing it in the market too, is people don't want to take risks when hiring. And I think Ben and I talk about this all the time. I think you miss on some great candidates, but the case is that people want to hire folks that have done the same job before or very similar job, so they can bring that domain expertise and hit the ground running and be more impactful right away. And all these loops are actually like designed to get signal on that very early on. I think sometimes even they try the recruiter to get signal on that. I think sometimes like the recruiters struggle with that, but that's why in most of these loops, the hiring manager call is the second call or the third call, because the hiring manager, before they spend a lot of time on, which these interviews are extremely expensive for companies, they want to make sure, hey, does this person have the right skill sets to succeed here? And that's why having good behavioral stories that demonstrate that what you've done translate perfectly to the role that you're applying for is critical. Otherwise, you're just not going to make it past that hiring manager call.
Yeah, and that's actually at Uber, the hiring manager is literally like they have one objective in the hiring manager call, which is to ask themselves like, will this person pass the jam? And if they don't think this person can pass the jam, they won't move them forward.
Yeah, I think that's, by the way, true for any of the three companies that we talked to, right? There is some sort of like group like event that happens, either like a presentation or the on-site for Stripe. And basically, they're all trying to de-risk. One is, does this person have the skill sets that I need them to succeed in this role? And then two, based on what I know about that process, are they going to succeed? And if the answer is no, even if you have the right skill sets, they're just going to cut you because it's going to be a waste of time for everyone.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go on to Figma.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'll let you go first this time. As you think about what we learned there, what stands out to you as things that are particularly interesting or surprising even?
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting with a couple of things. One is that I think in a way similar to Uber, the interview process or the hiring manager interview might be very different depending on the type of role. So I think that's one thing of like, there's just not a lot of calibration, especially for that initial hiring manager call. I think the thing that is also interesting about Figma is because Figma is like, decisive company that moves really quickly, has grown really fast, it's already public, is that it's a very consensus-driven decision-making company. And what that means is that the hiring manager, they're actually the ones that make the final decision, but they often will not make a decision unless everyone is like super aligned on that this person is a good call. So what that means basically is you have to impress everyone. If there's even like someone who's like lukewarm, they're not going to go for it. So that was one. I think there's two things that felt that in hindsight, they feel obvious. But one is, of course, like you have to be like a craft freak. And I think someone called it like basically like you need to show like, hey, you can put together beautiful slides, right? You're building for designers. You should be a really good visual storyteller, and also like just a good storyteller, period. The other thing that was interesting and that Figma really cares about is executive presence. Can you really command a room? They just have this expectation that PMs and product leaders really have to be the ones like managing execs, managing different stakeholders. And that's something that culturally speaking is really important at Figma. That's probably in the hiring manager interview that they're looking like, hey, does this person have that exec presence that I'm confident like in this panel when they have the onsite, are they going to be able to feel like, hey, like they can command room, they can dictate where the conversation goes, because they put a lot of emphasis on that. So I think that was an interesting point of view. The other thing that's also interesting too, and again, I think, well, you realize like when you see this, like how this kind of companies and products work, like you think back and be like, oh, this makes sense. Like another thing that's really important that they look for that's not obvious is they want to make sure that you're collaborative, right? That you can collaborate, that you can, it's really like Figma is really a multiplayer culture. They want to make sure that when you're doing the interviews and you're working through something, it's less of you ask a question and then you reply. It's more of kind of, can you work together with the room or the person to get to the answer? And so those were some big ones. Other obvious ones is like, that it's obvious, but I just like want to state it because it's like, if you miss this, it's just such a like silly miss is like, you're going to have a presentation, you're going to have a jam where you're like brainstorming, use their products. Like they have a great Figma slides, they have FigJam. Yeah, don't go in and use like Google Slides or if you're making a prototype, use Figma Make, right? I think that kind of shows, one, is going to help you understand the product better, and two, it kind of shows that you're serious and you love the product. And that's actually what people care about. And yeah, I'll pause there. I probably can keep going, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think I agree with all that. A couple things I'll add is I think even though it's not easy to get an interview at Uber and at Stripe, I'd say out of the three, getting an interview at Figma seemed like it was actually one of the hard. It's almost like the biggest bottleneck. One person said that the hardest part about getting a job at Figma is getting an interview at Figma. And so being able to like network your way into getting even an interview, which referrals often don't even get, that sounded like one of the hardest parts. And then, so I thought that was interesting. I think also we heard a couple people mention how there's a product sense case as part of the Figma interview process, and being like overly like structured and overly relying on frameworks can actually come off like negative to them. There's like an allergy to being kind of like using overly structured frameworks. So I thought that's definitely not true for like Meta or like Amazon, like these kind of companies. That's definitely not true for them. And then I would say, what else? Oh, the other thing that I thought was interesting, and maybe it's not super unique, but I never saw it before this, is that when you have I think this was Figma, where you have your presentation and then they will already schedule your full on-site loop after the presentation. But if you don't do well in the presentation, they will cancel the on-site loop. So this is actually one of the only examples of a company that will almost like get ahead of their skis and schedule a round of interviews before it's guaranteed to happen, just to get it on the books. And that allows them to, I think, move fast. And then the people you meet in that round will mostly be people that were in the room during the presentation.
Yeah. I think the other thing the last thing that I'll say there too is something that felt unique about Figma compared to the other two that we've done is that it felt the most behavioral out of all of them. I felt like every interview was, except the product sense one, and felt very, you just have to have like stories. That's basically like what they're looking for. So I think and I think also I might be misrecalling, but like they just recommended not to use the same stories multiple times. So I think that's something that is just like, so just to do well at Figma, you need to master the behavioral and interview storytelling. And yeah, I think that's important if you want to do well.
Yeah. And then something that I think I'll plus one here that you said about Uber too is like the level of kind of like poor calibration, or not, like less existing calibration. Like we talked to some people who basically said there's not a lot of process designed to make sure that you are a calibrated interviewer at Figma. It's a lot of vibes, something to keep in mind. Less true than places like Meta.
Yeah. I think those are the main things. But I think the kind of like a question that they keep, I think someone framed this way, it's like a question that people keep asking themselves in the back of the head, like through the entire interview process, is like, do we think this person has what it takes to like keep like Dylan engaged for an hour, right? Dylan is their CEO and founder. So I think that's something that like they really look for, is can this person communicate clearly in a way that's engaging, exciting, that someone who's super busy, super high caliber is going to be able to listen to you and pay attention.
Totally. I think you want to go talk a little bit about Stripe and then we can start wrapping. Yeah, I'll go first with Stripe. I think for me, with Stripe, one of the things that's interesting is that, and we found out about this when I hosted a panel with some folks from, I think it was like LTK, Duolingo, and Stripe, this panel that I hosted on Maven a few months ago. And they said that Stephanie from Stripe said this then, and it was confirmed in our conversations, that they recently chose to take the Product Sense interview and move it. It used to be hiring manager and then Product Sense, and now they do Product Sense and then hiring manager. And the reason is that they found themselves actually, the Product Sense interview had the highest failure rate in the process. So they chose to front load it. That's cool because it demonstrates to me an active kind of updating of the process, which is important. And they have this thing that they call like the 3 products format that I think they apply across the product sense. They apply it in technical interviews. They apply it like it's every time you have an interview with someone at Stripe, you want to be prepared to speak about 3 different options for where you might go, or be prepared to pick amongst 3 different options of where you want to go and evaluate between those. And then like you do the bulk of the case is about one of those things. But it seems like it's just like culturally programmed there that there's like this 3 and then 1 go deep.
Yeah, great point. There are 2 things that surprised me about Stripe that I think are unique to the other 2 that we've mentioned. One is, I feel like Uber and especially Figma were a lot more like visual, like your artifacts were presentations, they had to be compelling and they had to stand alone. Stripe on the other side, it's very much a written culture. And what that means is that your exercise, which is a written exercise, has to be really good. Like you have to be able to communicate succinctly, but clearly, and you have to have a very good story, but at the same time, it should be engaging. And so I think just the ability to like communicate concisely in a written form is super important. And I think it's almost like you should spend as much time getting to like the insights that you want to share to the actually how you share those insights. So I think that was something that's unique about Stripe, and that's really important. And a lot of times they use that written exercise to filter people out from the onsite. You can crush the hiring manager, you can crush the product sense, but if your written exercise is weak, they'll just cut you. But the opposite actually can be true too, right? Let's say they're like, meh, you barely passed the hiring manager and the product sense, but you have an amazing written exercise that can help you to make it to the onsite. So that's one thing. The other thing that was surprising, and I think maybe only Google does this, and I don't know if they still do it, but is they put a lot of emphasis in being technical. And it doesn't mean like you have to be like software engineer level, like technical, but you do need to be able to communicate, be able to share technical concepts and architecture in a way that's clear, in a way that's not too complex, and have a good conversation with engineers, almost like system design for PMs, like you can think about it. So that's something that's important as well. And the reason for that is just that Stripe is powering the kind of infrastructure for payments, and also it's something that started as like a developer first product. So those are the main things. The other thing that felt kind of surprising about, or a couple of things that I want to mention to you about Stripe. So Stripe, probably out of all of those companies, probably has like, I'm making assumptions here, but if I were going to guess, they have probably the highest ratio of PMs to engineers. So the PMs have a lot of scope. And what that means is that I think they're looking for PMs that can really navigate in ambiguity, because everyone's super busy. And they really don't hire anyone that's not like a senior PM or staff. And that usually means that you're probably like a staff at your previous company, because Stripe tends to down level. So that's just something for you to know. And if you're kind of like senior in a company that maybe like they don't treat like that, maybe like people might not respect that level, what's really important for you to demonstrate is kind of like that entrepreneurial spirit, and show that you can operate it with autonomy, and that you can like unblock yourself, and that you can do things on your own. Because otherwise, if you cannot signal that during the process, you're probably not going to make it. So I think getting those behavioral stories of like how you operate in autonomy is super important. And then the last piece that I say there is that out of all the companies, like their process felt the most mature. Like I felt like Stripe took hiring the most seriously out of all those companies that we talked about. Like the fact that they have a huddle after the interview, and then they have a committee that reviews every person that passed, and they compare it, they talk about it. And these are people, like the people that are in this committee are product leaders, they're people that are managers of managers, or sometimes just managers. And they're not only just deciding, hey, is this person going to be good, but they also decide on leveling. So I think that there's a level of care there that I was just very impressed by. And I think, one more thing that come to mind too. Stripe is also the only place where I got the sense that not only you need to pass all the interviews, but you need to like spike in like at least 1 or 2. And if you don't spike in 1 or 2, you're probably not going to make it through the entire process. That's just something for you to know. Like if it's probably going to be hard to get the job if you don't feel you crushed it in 2 of their interviews.
Totally, yeah. If you just like slide by lukewarm, just passing all the interviews, I think that was surprising to me that you don't get the offer. And then, like point about their maturity. It's interesting because I know you meant out of the three companies, and I would agree out of the three companies, they're the most mature. But if I think about comparing it to Meta's interview process, which has been around much longer than Stripe, the Meta process is so much more like streamlined and short and focused. And so I do wonder, Stripe is by far the most rigorous process of not just within the guides we've put together, but honestly, out of any of the companies I just know about in general, Stripe's process is the most arduous to get through. It's the most rigorous. And so I would say to people, like, don't casually interview with Stripe. If you're going to interview with Stripe, like it's like a part-time job, like interviewing with Stripe. It's like a lot of work and you have to get excited. I think they genuinely are trying to filter out people that do not enjoy or find this kind of preparation intellectually interesting. Getting like brushing up on fundamental like system design and API, how APIs work, and like being prepared to not just talk about how the stack worked in your previous companies for the products you worked on, and like the technical considerations and trade-offs that you made to make those systems work, but then also being able to apply that thinking to a brand new kind of challenge live during a case. Like you have to get excited about that. That shouldn't feel like something like, oh, I got to do that. I think they're genuinely looking for people to get excited about that because there's no way to excel in all these interviews without being really pumped about it. And then as a result, when you get in, there's an archetype of a PM at Stripe that I think is very different than the archetype of a PM at other companies. Like the very technical, very entrepreneurial, and then also somehow also having like leadership skills and be able to apply like a good user experience lens on everything that they do. It's actually I think it's quite impressive that they can attract that many PMs that are good at all these things.
But as I was learning about this interview process, it was like, oh, of course Stripe is freaking crushing it. If they're taking every single thing that they do as seriously as they take hiring people, like there's no kind of scenario where they don't win and they don't keep growing at this space, which is something for you to consider. I think you're going to get equity, and that equity is probably going to continue being worth a lot. There's a lot of operational excellence in that company that I was really impressed by. Yeah.
And this is probably not different than Figma and Uber, but the day-to-day life of a product manager at Stripe probably struck me as the most, even though Uber is intense, I think the day-to-day life of PM at Stripe strikes me as a bit more challenging.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So anyways, that's just something else that stuck out. It was surprising. I would have I wouldn't have predicted that before you put these guides together.
Yeah. The other thing that was I'll do one final one and then let's start wrapping. One thing that was surprising about Stripe too is that the user experience interview is optional. Not every PM has to go through that. Only if you're working on very customer facing products, you have to do that interview. That, I don't know, that to me in my head, like again, I only worked with customer facing products, but that just felt so surprising since it just feels like such a core part of the job. But yeah.
Yeah. In closing, I would say one thing I found interesting across all three guides we put together so far is like the degree to which excellence in the interview process can give you almost like mobility and create optionality for you to move. I know we mentioned this explicitly in the context of Uber earlier, but I know for sure this was true for Stripe. We've heard multiple examples of how candidates who crush up to a certain point, even if the business needs change or the job is no longer available, there's an ability to literally go from like a rejection to a yes with a different team, like by having the right people in your corner, whether that's a hiring manager or referral and recruiter. Just reiterating the importance of nurturing those relationships with the people that are helping you get through the process while also excelling in the interviews themselves. Cool. So I think that's good enough for the company specific guides. Now, just like in general, in closing, I got to say, I've really been enjoying working on this so far. It's fun. I'm learning a lot. It's helping me stay close to the market and to better understand where things are shifting. You and I are not currently in the seat in a individual, like an ICPM role at the moment. So we're on the sidelines observing some of what's happening and trying to help people that we know who want to stay and to continue growing as like employed product management leaders, just understand these things. And then I think maybe this is also something that's sharing too much, but honestly, going through putting these guys together has reaffirmed in a lot of ways that I'm not drawn to doing IC product PM work at the moment. Like I don't find myself getting excited about jumping through these hoops, and I have a lot of respect and like admiration actually for the PMs that love product management so much that they are willing to put in this legwork and to crush these interviews. And to be able to play a small role in their preparation journey, because they have to do 99.9% of the work to crush these interviews, is really impressive. And I have a lot of admiration for the PMs that like want to crush these interviews.
100%. I was going to finish in a very similar note, is that I have zero desire to do any of these loops myself. Part of it is I want to protest some of these loops and how they hire and the way this works. That's one. But also it's extremely competitive. I don't want to sugarcoat it for anyone. Like, I've talked to people that are spending hundreds of hours to prepare for an interview. And honestly, that's what it takes, right? Unless you're someone who's extremely well connected, has amazing logos in your company and can shortcut some of these, and you have the blessing of the CPO from that company, be like, which then what makes everything like easier down the line. Like, you're against people that have literally read every single resource that's in the internet, have watched every single video, and has paid thousands of dollars for mock interviews with people that are calibrated interviewers. Yeah, I just have a lot of admiration for people who are going through the process, but I also want to be like, finish with a message of just be kind to yourself. It's something that's really difficult. It's highly competitive. And just the fact that you're having the opportunity to interview with these companies and getting on the door, that's already a win on itself. It's someone who's recognizing that the work that you have done throughout your career is meaningful. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Cool. I've got nothing to add. I think that's a great note to end on. We'll include links in the show notes if people want to go check out the site, check out the previews, and I think the Stripe guide will be live by the time this goes live as well. So I'm excited to share that.
Yeah, same here. And also, by the way, if you're listening to this and made it to this point, like, Ben and I want to get honest feedback. Like, what did you think about this episode? What did you think about our process? Like, what assumption of that we've shared of like when we started of what we're here feels like we got wrong? We're learning on the way, and we just want to do the right thing. So if you have any thoughts or feedback, just ping us. Just send us a DM in LinkedIn, and we'll definitely reply, and it'll be super useful, and we'd be very grateful for that.
And if there's any other company guides that you're like, why don't they do this company? Tell us. Like, I think DoorDash is on our list. OpenAI is something that we know people are interested in. But if there's another company that you're super excited about, please tell us.
Yeah. We appreciate you. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap.
Bye-bye.